Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, January the 26th, 2016. First part of Citizens Forum is always the Walt and Jack Show. Before we start, I'd especially like to thank our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every week. So over the last 2 weeks, there has been some, I don't know what word to use, difficulties perhaps between the people who make this show and the Shaw Corporation. And the difficulties revolve around, I'm not sure exactly what they revolve around, things we've said. So just basically, on the January the 12th show, something came up and four comments were removed from the January the 12th show. And those comments still haven't aired. In fact, the January 12th show hasn't yet aired. And the January 19th show, which was showing last week, some parts were taken out. Now, to go back to the January 12th show, 4 statements were made. We stand behind all those statements. We think they're true. We think they're fair comment. We think they're correct. We stand behind them. But I just want to go a little bit into the comment that I made. What I said on the show was something along the lines of the RCMP blew up a building, bombed a building. The RCMP blew up a building and blamed it on innocent people, or not, and blamed it on somebody else. So here's a story, because remember, we're having trouble getting that shown. So here is a story from the CBC. This is 1999. This happened quite a while ago. I'll just read a little bit from it. The Mounties bombed an oil installation as part of a dirty tricks campaign in their investigation into sabotage in Alberta's oil patch. The revelation came at bail hearings Tuesday of 2 farmers who the Crown says have turned their complaints that the oil industry pollution is making their families ill into acts of vandalism and mischief, which is kind of an interesting way of phrasing it, because they're being made sick by the oil industry, but when they fight back a little bit, the oil industry is completely okay, and they become guilty of vandalism and mischief. And that's the way all of our laws are in this country. The 2 people's lawyer produced evidence that the RCMP bombed a well site and that they did it with the full support of the energy company that owned it. The Crown admits the allegations are true. The story goes on a little bit, but it ties into what's happening today, what's happening in our country today. Because what do we know, for example, about the attack on Parliament that we don't sort of get from the RCMP? This was October 22nd, I guess a couple of years ago now. Somebody was killed, a soldier outside. Then the gunman was also killed inside, shot, I think, 38 times. Out of that came Canada's illegal war on Syria. What we're doing in Syria is really, it's against all international law. And we don't even know it. We as Canadians don't even know it because the media doesn't tell us and the politicians don't tell us. And when Trudeau, I don't know where I stand on Trudeau, but when he wants to pull our fighter jets, our bombers, out of an illegal war, the media is all over him. The media is so critical. Hey, look what's happening. ISIS is all over the place. ISIS is attacking us. We're threatened. We have to keep bombing Syria. But they never say that ISIS is funded by the United States. And if you Google that, U.S. funds ISIS, you'll see that a lot of people think that. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. Now, it may not be right, but a lot of serious journalists, researchers, writers, people think the same thing. So that's why we so desperately need independent media, because The corporate media is the corporate media. It's owned by big business, and it tells the big business story. It can't do anything else. That's why community television is so important and could be so much more important. So that's all I wanted to say.
So, Jack, what are we talking about? We're going to be talking about the war in Syria, or the Canadian bombing and killing in Syria, or do you want to talk some more about other issues with Shaw? I mean, I agree for the most part. What you're saying here is so vital that we get the facts out the best we can, and I really think that it's troubling when you think about that issue with the RCMP, with the Crown admitted that they did do these bombings. You have to wonder under what sort of duress they must have been under in order that they had to admit it.
Yeah.
They didn't go to court and fight it out. They admitted it.
So when these people, the RCMP, then are known, can we call them terrorists? But at least bombers. They're at least bombers. And if they've done it once, who's to say they haven't done it again? And who's to say what they do, because we don't know. It's so dangerous.
And that's always what I've been saying, like, who gets to investigate the investigators?
Yeah. And who do the investigators really work for? Do they work for the people of Canada, or do they work for corporate Canada? Personally, I think they work for corporate Canada, and which is very dangerous for all the rest of us.
And it's troubling because it threatens the sovereignty of the country. When the people lose faith in the fundamental institutions like the criminal justice system, you can devolve into a third world style country pretty quickly.
I think that's exactly what's happening. I think that's where we're being moved into, I mean, the oil companies are doing to us now what we used to watch them do on the news in the 1960s and 70s and 80s to people in Central America, South America, Asia. Now they've come home to roost. Maybe they've been pushed out of everywhere else. Nobody else wants them.
So I think you backed up. I think you backed up that comment with some fairly good research. And I think we should touch on what's happening in Syria right now, because, I just got up this morning and heard the CBC radio and Anna Maria Tremonti, who you'd think is fairly top-notch journalist for the CBC. But I'm getting more and more of a sense that she's a top-notch propagandist for the CBC, because she refuses to look at what's happening in Syria. The CBC refuses to actually question the legitimacy.
So what were they saying on CBC?
Well, they were just talking about a number of things, but one thing that struck my interest was they're saying now that 72% of Canadians are in favor of bombing and killing Syrians, and that the support for bombing and killing Syrians, surged after the Paris attacks.
Of course.
So
that's why they had to do the Paris attacks.
Well, one would have to wonder, wouldn't they? I mean, is that fair to say, given that what we know about NATO in Europe and the whole Operation Gladio scenario that's been talked about all over Europe, it's been in the mainstream media. We're not making that one up. You can Google that. And you start to really wonder, okay, what's really going on there? But the question is, in my mind, is say if Saudi Arabia had a vote and 72% of that country thought it was a good idea to bomb Canada, would that be a good idea? Would that be legitimate? Would we just say, well, they want to do it, 72%, I guess we got to go with it? So, I mean, it's such a ridiculous situation that we're in. And by the way, all of a sudden they're interested in asking us, should we be doing something? When they're committing some kind of war crimes and we're against it, they don't ask us our opinion. They just go ahead and do it. But anyway...
So I'll just throw in, what's happening is a propaganda campaign to build Canadian support for this ongoing Western-backed terror war all over the Middle East, and the creation of ISIS, and the creation of the refugee situation, all done, planned out, made to happen by forces that nobody in this country will talk about. That's the official story.
Well, anyway, look, they were talking about the killings in Burkina Faso, the hotel shootings that happened recently in the last week or so, which 6 Canadians died, and 18 people from foreign nationals, like 18 people from different countries around the world, were murdered that day. Now, like, you know, when they attacked, when the Paris shootings happened, they went into these cafes, they shot a bunch of people, knowing there's going to be a lot of tourists there. Now, you know, if you were wondering if this was a false flag operation, wouldn't that be a good way to go? Kill a bunch of people, really upset a lot of people all around the world, to let everybody know that these terrorists are a group that we have to suppress. Now, the Burkina Faso shootings they follow the same trends. You know, for instance, the people that perpetrated the crime are now all dead, shot dead, by not only the Burkina Faso police, but the French security services were also there helping them out. Now, again, we just have to ask some questions. And I think it's fair to ask and wonder, are there connections between these different events? The other event I'd like to just talk about, to draw it all together, of course, there's this Charlie Hebdo shootings, that happened a year before, that followed the same trends with the murderers that are supposed to be jihadi terrorists and all that. But what caught my attention was, for instance, when Benjamin Netanyahu was running for the first time as president of Israel, he was well behind in the polls. And the president of Israel was shot just during that campaign, and he was involved in negotiating peace with the Palestinians and all that. There was quite a powerful peace movement going on in Israel. When Netanyahu arrived, and there's a very, very powerful right-wing segment of Israeli society, really took over and promoted Netanyahu. And he was 30 points behind in the polls just 2 months before the elections. 4 bombings occurred in succession, slaughtering hundreds and hundreds of people in Jerusalem. 4 bus bombings. Every time there was a bombing, Netanyahu surged in the polls to the point where he won that election. And he ran on a campaign that only I can protect you from the Palestinian bombings. And if you look back in retrospect, and you look at Netanyahu's face, it's plastered all over the Charlie Hebdo thing, "We are Charlie Hebdo" and all that. And he was, all the leaders of the world gathered around in Paris, and there was Netanyahu in the middle with all these leaders, forming around, supporting this agenda. Whatever this agenda is, which is really a mystery, let's face it, we can't quite figure it.
Well, we can see what's happening in Canada. The rich are getting richer. Corporate power is growing. There's massive debt. The environment is being destroyed. The homeless roam our streets. That, to me, is the agenda. And behind the smokescreen of "let's fight terror," these are the real things that are happening to us. These are the things that are happening in our lives every day, right?
Yeah.
And we don't even have time to think about them because we're so. I mean, watch the news. It's all about sports, crime, violence, and a foreign terror coming at us. But what's the real problem that we have? To me, the real problems we have are, the people who run our country have taken all the money. And why do we live in a country, the second biggest country in the world, with chock-a-block full of all the natural resources and wondrous beauty, and people can't afford to buy a house? I mean, how can that happen if it isn't the plan, the agenda? Because who makes money out of this? If we're all massively in debt to buy a house, where does the money go? It's not by accident. And just on the issue of housing, that's why there's so many homeless people. They've created, I think, an artificial shortage of housing. So if you want anything, you got to pay top dollar. And at the bottom, there's nothing left because there is a shortage, so those people are just out in the street. I mean, what kind of crazy way is that to run a country?
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to finish off with one more comment on this, Jack, because I don't know who's running these operations and killing these people, but I do see a trend where some political entities do really gain strength as a result of these attacks. Now, are they the ones perpetrating the attacks? I'm not saying that, but boy, do they ever benefit.
And don't we deserve an investigation into this? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the things we think are 100% correct.
Yeah.
But if you corporate America funded Hitler, if they did that, you just have to Google Bush, Hitler, and Guardian. You'll see the story, as I've mentioned many times, but which our corporate media will never. How can it be? Because if you know that corporate America funded the Nazis, then you can look at everything that's happening now in a very different light. Now, maybe they're completely innocent this time around, but maybe they're not. And if they've done it before, don't you have to ask the question? But it's like the question cannot be asked.
Yeah, and this is the thing that really upsets me about the CBC News. Now, not the whole CBC organization. There's a lot of great people doing a lot of great research and great reporting and journalism, but the news and the mainstream sort of commentary just refuses to examine this issue this way, just as a possibility. We're not, as you say, these facts are stacking up pretty firmly, pretty strongly. There's an agenda here. And when you see that the Canada's, our broadcasters are not allowing this dialogue to occur, it's very troubling. And I think we have to push to have that dialogue be shifted towards asking these fundamental questions. We deserve it. Canadians deserve to have this discussion.
We do deserve it, but we're kind of powerless in our own country to make it happen. The top politicians are controlled, the media is owned. This is not the country that many of us thought it was not that long ago. And the control is so strong. Where is an alternative movement that can step up and say, no, that we just want some democracy. We just want some democracy, meaning that the people have a voice in what goes on in the country. Shouldn't that be the way it works? But we have no voice, except when we get up and yell and scream. And why should we have to do that all the time?
Yeah, and we have to. These things cause great uncertainty, and I think it causes fear in people. And when fear occurs, people tend to become protective of what they say and become very concerned and worried that what they say may be held against them. Now, the thing is that we get freedom of speech, supposedly, in this country. Even if you're wrong, even if you say things that are repugnant, I'll support your right to say it, but you have to allow me to engage and to refute your claims and all that. It has to be an open discussion.
Yeah, I'm not there with the repugnant stuff. But
well, the thing is, sometimes
I don't know.
Things are said that I find quite upsetting, but I'm going, okay, I can deal with that.
Well, let's move around to Souk Lake, which is kind of, as we're all watching over here, there's the potential, the possibility that our own drinking water supply is being threatened by the beginnings of a 5 million ton contaminated waste site, which we all think is near Shawnigan Lake, but really is closer to Souk Lake than it is to Shawnigan Lake. And it's kind of shocking that this threat is there, and our media, how many people in the city know about it, and why don't we know about it?
And I was been reading on this issue, and it's been boiling down to me in my mind. And I think it's just one comment I'd like to make about it is that, there's a contaminated soil site that's being built near our watershed. There's debate whether or not it'll affect our watershed. The thing is that why are they deciding to take that risk? It's like when you build a nuclear power plant, And if you look at the catastrophic things that can happen as a result of failure, building a nuclear power plant doesn't make any sense. We don't have to build it. And the same thing, we don't have to put a contaminated soil site at the top of our watershed. It doesn't make any sense to take that risk in the
Actually,
first
it's the top
place.
of somebody else's watershed, but...
Well, possibly on ours too, but the thing is, we're taking risks there we don't have to take.
Exactly.
And that, to me, is the bottom line. If the public was better informed, perhaps the public would stand up and say, hey, we don't want to take that risk. You politicians may feel comfortable with it, but we don't.
Yeah. And this is all right on the head of Christy Clark. It's the provincial government that has okayed this dump to happen. It's shocking that they would take that risk, and we, the people who are potentially at risk, I mean, we don't even know about it.
And with the CRD, I'm going to say it probably every show, so I think the CRD should be directly elected. And matter of fact, I think city councilors should be banned from running for the CRD. I think there's too much of a conflict of interest. I think the CRD should be a separate form of government with separate directors, with an agenda to handle regional government, and let the city councilors and the mayors do their job. They're elected to handle their own municipalities.
Is that more of the system they have out east in what you called counties?
It's similar. It would be a huge amount of legislation to create counties in British Columbia.
Yeah,
but you would have to have.
Would be similar.
You see, you have levels of government. We could talk about governance sometimes. Right now, the CRD has equal government status with municipalities, and that doesn't work. That's another problem for another day.
Yeah. Thank you, Walt. And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.